can give it a start. Good afternoon, everyone. To those of you who have just joined us, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time again. This session is the greening of ELT, an overview and some classroom ideas. And in this webinar, we're going to look at how the ELT community, or even like a community of educators, how can they reduce the climate footprint by changing some of the way they do things. And we all know that your classrooms are actually providing an amazing opportunity to raise this kind of awareness of environmental crisis and help students connect with nature, let's say. And this can actually ensure a healthier world for a future generation. I'm very interested in this topic to know because it seems like you don't need to be a climate expert to inspire your students and encourage the critical thinking. And I'm going to leave it to Chris and Katherine to enlighten us more on this subject. But this session will have two sections actually. So the first one will be where Christopher will look at some of the ways in which we can contribute to the climate crisis through the ways we operate, and also suggest ideas to reduce our negative impact on the environment. I think this is particularly a very important one. And this will be followed by Katherine, who will look at the opportunities we have in our classroom to explore and integrate climate-related themes into our teaching. And we're very happy to take any Q&A at the end of the session, so we have allocated some time for that now. And I'm your moderator for today. My name is Sarah Shuja. I'm a marketing manager at McGraw Hill. My colleague Hamad Khilji should be joining me soon. And we're in the background if you need any assistance, any help, if your audio is not working or you have any kind of questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box. You can interact with the presenter in the chat box. And we do want to keep this session as interactive as possible. So feel free to interact in the chat box with the presenters. Talking about presenters, I'd like to introduce you to Christopher Graham. He's done a few webinars for us earlier, so I gather we are familiar with him. But just so anyone who's joining us today for this session, he's a freelance English language teaching consultant and a teacher educator and a writer who's based in UK. He has worked in the field since 1981, which means 40 years of experience, Chris?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me, but yes.
And he's one of the founders of ELT Footprint. He has just finished a book for English for teachers around making their classes greener. So this is very relevant to us. And moving on to our next presenter, who's Katherine Bilsborough. Katherine is a freelance ELT author, a teacher trainer, and a consultant. She has published more than 100 course books and online courses and writes regular blogs and articles. Katherine is also the co-founder of the global ELT Footprint community. Thank you, both of you, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, I can stop sharing my screen and hand over to Chris to continue the session. But if you have any questions at all, if you need any help, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. There we have Kath again, still looking at us. So I'll move on to the next one. I'm quite amazed that Kath has written over 100 books and online courses. Isn't that astonishing? What an achievement. Okay. Here's a little overview or an outline of what we're going to do today. As Sherish has already said, it's effectively divided into two sections, two parts. The first part, you'll be with me, and I'll be exploring a little bit about the negative impacts that English language teaching makes on the environment. And many people, when I mention that, say, well, there aren't any. We don't really, do we? No, we're fine. But I'll hopefully open your eyes a little bit to one or two things that we do, and therefore some of the things that we could do to perhaps reduce our impact on the environment. Then talking about climate change and English language teaching in broader terms, the section there called Climate Change in You. And then the inspiration section is just a few links, web links of ideas and materials that you can go to try using some ideas around integrating green topics into your classes. And the other half will be bringing climate topics into the classroom with Kath, who will be talking about ways of adapting course materials and a whole lot of other ideas, practical ideas that you can use fairly easily, fairly simply, and fairly quickly. But before we start talking in any great detail, as I say, a lot of people, if I say to them, well, English language teaching has an impact on the environment, people say, no, it doesn't. What do you mean? We're teachers. We go to school, we teach. That's what we do, and it's nothing to do with the environment. Well, as I say, we do have quite a considerable impact. So that's the first thing to think about. And the second thing that I think we need to consider is that not only do we make an impact, but we are in a great opportunity to actually do some good for the climate emergency, because we are teachers, we are educators. So those are the two sides of what I want to talk about. Now, climate change is, and everything around the climate change is potentially quite controversial. I don't think many people say that climate change doesn't exist, because it's fairly obvious that it does. I'm sitting in London at the moment, and tomorrow is going to be 32, 35 degrees, which is exceptional. It is definitely getting warmer. We see evidence of it here and around the world. In virtually every country in the world, there is evidence of climate change. I think the controversy has been what the causes are, but it is generally accepted that unfortunately it is a man-made phenomenon. It's something that we have done and are continuing to do to ourselves rather than a natural phenomenon. But as I say, as English language teachers, we're part of the global community. We're part of the problem, but potentially perhaps we're also part of the solution. And that's what I want to look at. So these are our negative impacts, the things that you might not necessarily think about. You sit down and think about it, you'll come up with the same ones probably. The first one is paper. English language teaching is a fairly paper-heavy community. We use a lot of paper. This might be a strange thing to say when you're working with a publishing company, but you know, course books use a lot of paper. And one of the problems with the way we use paper is that much of it is single use. I have no scientific evidence for this, but all of us are teachers, and I think you might well agree with me. But the average page in a course book is probably used for no more than 5 or 6 minutes in its entire life, often rather less if it's just a picture. Students look at the page, they do the activity, they fill in the box, they circle the verbs, whatever it is they do, then they turn over, and they probably never look at that page again unless they're revising for an exam. So a lot of the paper use is single use. We don't use course books again. And do we really need all those handouts? You know, when I was teaching, well, I don't teach anymore, but when I was teaching, I was a very enthusiastic handout producer. And it's a wonderful idea to give students worksheets, but most of those, again, are single use. So we use a lot of paper. One of the solutions, of course, to that is digitalization. And COVID, if this is the right word, gave us a dividend, gave us an opportunity, because it required us to move rapidly online and start to use digital tools to be able to deliver our teaching. And I think, yes, digital probably is the solution in terms of paper. It is a massive reduction in the way that we use paper. And those of you who've been working online or still are working online or working hybrid now, whatever combination you're in, your paper usage will have reduced. Those of you who follow environmental affairs will understand that there is an impact, a negative climate impact of digital education. The thing we're doing now, live streaming, does use data. And storage of files and photographs uses data, and all those servers that store the information have to be called, and that does have an impact on the environment. But there are surveys being done at the moment in academic studies, and they are showing that yes, while there is an impact of digital, it is nowhere near as bad as the impact of cutting down all those trees. And it's not just cutting down trees, it's shipping them around the world, it's the printing, the whole process as well. Things that you can do, very simple things you can do in class, is to have what I will call paper usage monitors. Have students reminding other students and reminding you about the way you're using paper. Having students say to you, do we need this handout? Could we use the back of this for making notes next week? Something like that. And try to make paper reduction culture a default in class. You can do something about paper reduction. you can minimize it in your class. You can try and have a paper-free week or paper-free month. These are small things, these are tiny things, but they will have an impact. But perhaps more important than their impact is that they raise awareness of the issues around paper use. So we use a lot of paper in our community. We use a lot of energy. And of course, we want students to be comfortable. Most of you are in the Middle East, and it's June, and having spent many years in the Middle East myself, I know it's hot, and you do need air conditioning units in class and in schools and at home and in other places that you go to. But you don't necessarily need them at night. So just learning things like switching off air conditioning, or if you're not in the Middle East, you're somewhere else and you need heating, switching it off when you can. Again, having students to monitor energy, to say, have we all switched off our computers? Have we switched off the lights? Tiny things, tiny things, but they do start to raise awareness. And having a little activity in class about where your energy comes from, how your energy is generated. Many places in the Middle East generate their energy, their electricity from solar. You're in a very good part of the world to do that. Morocco, in particular, in North Africa, is highly active in solar energy. That's quite a nice project-based lesson, isn't it? Where does your energy actually come from? Look for the little red lights. How many of us, when we finish with our computers, with our laptops, with our monitors, don't switch them off, we just leave them on standby? Now, the amount of energy that one monitor uses overnight for 8 hours while you're not using it is tiny. But you multiply that by all the monitors in your institution and multiply that by all the institutions in your city, and you have a huge possible energy saving. How many of you, when you switch your television off at home, do you really switch it off, or do you just switch it to standby? So look out for the little red lights is a way of doing it. As I say, your impact is tiny, but multiply it by all the little red lights in your city, or even just in your institution. How do we travel to the institution? Now, I know the Middle East is not a great place to cycle. You can cycle in the winter. I mean, very good luck to you cycling in 45 degrees in the summer. That wouldn't be a very sensible thing to do. But things like public transport, buses, these kinds of things, of course, do reduce energy usage. And I know increasingly, for example, in Dubai, there's an excellent metro system which allows you to get around the city quickly. And of course, that is a very climate friendly way of traveling because it's reducing car usage. So I know car usage is a challenge, and some societies are more car driven, that's not a joke, than others. But thinking about how we travel to the institution is another way that you can reduce your energy. Whoops, next one. There we go. For some reason the slide won't move down. There it is. Plastic. Well, yes. We do use a lot of plastic. I've got a couple of publishing people listening to me now. The way we package books and wrap books. Do we really need books wrapped in plastic? And what are they packaged in? Is it paper that's been recycled rather than new paper, or is it plastic? How we actually package books. Cups in school. Reusable cups, whether it's China cups, whether it's recycled cardboard cups, or whatever kind of cup, rather than the disposable plastic cups. Again, these are tiny things. You might think we don't use many cups in our school. In my university, we don't use many. I'm not suggesting you count them, but it wouldn't be a difficult piece of mathematics to think how many plastic cups you may waste in a day and multiply that up. So yes, of course, getting rid of plastic. And the way that paper and other things that come into school are packaged in plastic as well. Do you really need all that plastic around things? You know, when you buy a pair of scissors, or a new pair of scissors, or some of these marker pens, you know, they often come in plastic packaging, and you find yourself swearing at it as you're trying to open it. Do we really need all that plastic? So yes, dispose of plastic properly. But lobby, say to your school, we don't want this stuff in plastic. Speak to the people who sell it to us. Tell them we don't need it wrapped in plastic. It can come just in a cardboard packaging, or just in a paper bag. We don't need all this plastic. And they will speak to the manufacturers. These are small things, but as I say, if everybody lobbies against plastic, it will change. And it already is changing around the world. supermarkets increasingly use less plastic packaging now. So we are big plastic users as well in language teaching. Whoops, sorry. I've got a new mouse, very sensitive. Flying. Well, we are a community that has flown quite a lot, and obviously flying does its fair share of damage to the environment. Again, there's another kind of COVID dividend here, if that's the right word to use. Most business travel around English language teaching has reduced, and I think it will stay reduced. People from, for example, from some of the examination authorities used to send examiners all over the world, traveling all over the world. Because of COVID, they couldn't. They had to use local examiners, and they are largely continuing to use local examiners. So all those flights have been reduced. And also publishing companies are not flying people around the world to do talks. People like me, people like Kath, like they used to, we're sitting here doing it on Zoom. So I think travel has reduced there. Study abroad. Of course, I think everybody should have the right and the opportunity to go on a study abroad program, whether it's an English language course or maybe a master's degree. Of course, what a wonderful opportunity. But it is something of an elephant in the room, because a lot of people doing study abroad means a lot of seats on aeroplanes. It is a very flight heavy way of doing things. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting people should stop traveling to study abroad, but I'm saying maybe people should consider whether it really is the right option for them. I mean, in the United Kingdom alone, which is statistics I happen to have every year, there are 1.5 million seats on aircraft for people coming here and going home from studying English. 1.5 million seats. Which is a huge number of people, obviously. So I'm thinking about our flight burden as well. And one way, I suppose, what I'm saying is that you can make these small changes to behaviors around paper and plastic and switching the lights off, switching the air conditioning off, these things. But what is more important is really awareness, creating awareness in the school, in the university, in the institution. A lot of that can be encouraging students to put up posters reminding people about these messages. Bring your own cardboard cup, recycled cardboard cup to school, use a china cup, whatever, these kinds of things. If you're the last out the classroom, make sure the lights go off. Make sure the little red lights on the computer are off at the end of the day. So posters reminding people. One school in the UK started about 18 months ago having a green item on the agenda at every staff meeting. And it may just be a tiny thing about, do we need these handouts? If we do handouts, can we print them double-sided? All things like that, putting them on an agenda. And as a result of that agenda might be developing some green policies, some environment-friendly policies. And a lot of teachers say, well, that's not my job, I'm a teacher. It's not my job. That's the administration's job. My belief is that the only way we're going to deal with this environmental crisis, and it is a crisis, there's no doubt about it. I could show you some horrible statistics. I won't, but I could show you some horrible statistics about the impact of climate change around the world. The only way I think we're going to deal with it is if we all get involved. And a lot of the initiatives that I've seen, and I've been working in climate change and language teaching for nearly 2 years now, the best projects have started at the bottom. They started in school, they started at class level, often from students, and have gone upwards. And the administration said, okay, that's a good idea, we'll do that. So it does come from you, I think. A green suggestion box for green ideas. So students or anyone in the school community, university community can drop those ideas into the box. Green ambassadors, someone in each class or each year group or each department who is in charge of spreading green ideas. Schools and universities connecting with initiatives in the city or in the local community or even nationally. All the countries in the Middle East now have a lot of green initiatives around recycling, around trying to minimize the use of energy, particularly petroleum. Even though they're petroleum economies, they still understand the problems related to it. So trying to get your institution involved in these kind of initiatives. And they're actually really interesting ideas for teaching as well. They're exciting projects. And be the example. Your behavior as a teacher, sometimes saying, I started taking the metro when I go to the shops on Wednesday. I don't drive anymore. just that one thing, if that makes one or two families stop and think, then I think you've done a good job. As I say, it's raising awareness as much as actually reducing your impact. So climate change in you as a teacher. Well, why do I have to do this? Slide 1. Because not all teachers think, oh, it's not my job. No, I'm an English teacher. I don't have to do all this stuff. Well, I don't agree. Because for 2 reasons, really, which I've written there. I believe that you're not English teachers. I don't think I'm an English teacher. I think I'm a teacher. And I think we do have a broad responsibility to our learners, to their communities, and ultimately to the planet that we live on. So I think we do have to do it. I think all teachers have to do it, not just English teachers, but particularly English teachers, because English is the language of the climate change discussion. All the discussions on television that you see around the world, international conferences, are largely in English. That may be changing because the next COP is in Egypt, and the COP after that is in the UAE. So you're going to see a big focus on climate change. If you live in the Emirates or in the GCC, it's moving up and up your agenda, and there will be more material in Arabic, I think. But English is the language of the climate discussion. I just finished a project for the British Council, and we did some surveys. And this is a tiny survey that we did with some teenagers, but nonetheless, it was quite interesting. We asked that straight question: would you like your English lessons to have more climate change topics? And over 70% said yes. Young people want to engage with the climate crisis. They are more engaged than we are, we older people. They want to find out more about it, and they realize that English is the passport to that. It's the language of the climate discussion. So this shows very clearly, yes, students, it's a small sample, but students want this. And the other reason why you have to do this statistic is from John Nagg, who used to work for the British Council, and he calculated, I don't know how he calculated, that at any one time there are 1.5 billion people in the world learning English. That's not million, it's billion. That includes government schools in China and India, of course, which is why it's so big. That's a lot of people learning English. And that seems to me that we, as members of this great English language teaching community who are teaching these 1.5 billion students, do have a great opportunity to spread the word and to give them the language and also the skills to engage with the climate challenge, because it is a big challenge. And it's as I say, from what I understand from my reading, is getting worse very quickly. So we have an opportunity because of all those students. Teachers do feel a bit lost about this. I know, and I've heard this a lot, and I'm sure Kath has heard it as well. And here's from the same project. It's the same report. Just under 1,900 teachers around the world who did our survey, 80% said they felt they needed training. They want to do it. Teachers want to get involved with this. They want to be able to teach climate topics, but they're not entirely sure how to. There's a big lesson there for publishers and for teacher educators and universities. Teachers want to engage with this topic, but they're not sure how to. But it's interesting, as Sherry said at the beginning, you do not need to be a climate change specialist to teach green ELT, if I call it that kind of slang name, at all. I am not a climate change specialist. My academic background is politics and philosophy. It is not climate change. So I'm not a scientist, and you don't need to be. Sometimes I get people working in high schools say, well, I don't know what to do. I think, go and talk to the geography teacher. They'll know. And very often the students know the science. They just don't necessarily have the language and the skills to express it and discuss it. So you don't need to worry about the technical side of things. But I get that teachers want professional development to be able to deal with climate topics. Whoops, going too fast, sorry. Motivation can be a problem with climate. There is something called eco-anxiety, particularly younger learners, but also people in their early 20s worry about it. They find it depressing. I can't do anything about it. Particularly with images. We've all seen these horrible pictures of dead polar bears and dying seabirds. They're horrible. They upset me. They really upset younger people. So I think, be careful with images. When you start writing, well, I'll show them this picture of a dead polar bear. That will make them think, well, maybe it will just depress them. And it might make them think, as I've written there, there's nothing I can do. The best climate change education, I think, is positive and shows solutions. It's also locally relevant. Wherever you come from in the world, there is a climate impact. More rain than you used to have, or less rain than you need, hotter than it used to be, much hotter than it used to be, sea levels rising, floods, all these natural disasters, which have huge impacts on wherever that community. There's something locally relevant that you can find, and that is what will engage students. As I say, I think positivity also engages students. Another comment is there's no suitable materials. Well, there's some truth in that. In a minute, Catherine will talk you through that. But I just want to give you a little bit of inspiration. If I could learn how to use my mouse. These are just some web links. We will share these slides. McGraw Hill will share them either on their website or through an email, however they do it. So you'll have access to the links, but I'll just show you what we have here. The British Council, this is a project that I've been involved in and that Kath has also been involved in. Climate Connection is their project. You'll find lots of free of charge materials, some excellent lesson plans that Kath and I and Dan Barber, a colleague of ours, wrote. Of course, they're excellent. We wrote them. There's some podcasts. The report I mentioned before is about to be published. There is a MOOC, a massive open online course the British Council run on creating green ELT materials for your classes. They run inter-school, inter-university green competitions. There's a lot of initiatives you'll find through that website there. So the lesson plans, you can just download and use them. The podcast will give you ideas from projects that other people have done around the world. And the MOOC, you can actually sign up free of charge. It's on Future Learn, I think it is, and free of charge. And you can actually get some ideas to a more formal training structure. So those are the British Council initiatives. These are some other resources. ELT Footprint is the organisation that four of us set up. Kath and I are two of the original founders. There's a lot of ideas and inspiration on that website around integrating green ideas into classes. I don't have time to go into it now. The best thing is just to click on the link and to just spend some time navigating around the site, and you'll find hopefully a lot of inspiration ideas on arranging green conferences. It's not just about classes as well. Green Action ELT UK is around language schools in the UK, but again, they have lots of really interesting ideas around particularly making your school greener as well as what you teach. And ELT Sustainable and Renewable English are two projects, again, around integrating green topics into your ELT classes. So clicking through those various links, I won't do it now because of time, just go through, spend some time there. They all have lots of downloadable ideas that you can take, try out, maybe adapt, and then try out in your classes. So that is the end of my part. So I will now mute myself. You'll be glad to hear. And there's Kath. All you got to say, Kath, is next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Lots of great engagement in the chat box there. So that's very inspiring. I would just like to say one thing before I start this section, if you like, where I'm going to give some practical ideas. And that is, when teachers ask me, when some teachers are resistant and they say, why should we be doing this in the classroom? I've got my answer is more often than not these days is that whatever your thoughts on the climate crisis and what we should be doing in our classrooms, one thing is absolutely clear. The exams that our students are going to be taking in the future, the official exams, will have an element of the climate crisis in them, because that's happening now, okay? So all of the vocabulary, all of this new stuff that we will be teaching our students or helping our students learn and develop, they are going to be tested on that in the future. And the reason is because as more and more research is being done on sustainable education, we are starting to understand that businesses are saying the graduates that are leaving university today don't all necessarily have the skills that we need them to have for the jobs of tomorrow. So there's an if you like, the educators, the businesses and the world leaders are working together to find ways of incorporating sustainability education into the curriculum. So that's a good thing to say to parents who might be resistant. Your son, your daughter needs to know this because they will eventually come across it in an exam. So when I started thinking about what I would say in this part, I always think when I'm thinking of teachers, how can I make this very simple, very doable, and not be giving ideas that imply a lot of extra work, okay? Because as a teacher, I like to have things made as easy as possible for me. And so I'm going to mention some ideas for green classroom routines, resources that we can have in the classroom that are student generated and that grow and change and produce new resources, and all the while developing the green language and the life skills that your students need, your learners need. So let's move swiftly on, Chris, and we'll have a look at the first section here. So the first idea here is a green vocabulary box. Most of you are probably familiar with a vocabulary box, and this doesn't have to be just for younger learners, it can be for all ages. So as your students, or as students learning new vocabulary, it's a good idea to get them to write the new words from each lesson that come up, write them on little pieces of paper or card and put them in a box or a bag or a tin or whatever. And that box or bag or tin becomes a resource in itself and can be used to play games and to recycle that language until they've learnt it. So my idea is to have a green vocabulary box alongside any normal vocabulary box, and any words that they come across, your students, this can be in the lesson or at home, an article they read, if they think it's green vocabulary, they write it on a piece of paper and they pop it in the box. And that box can then be used throughout the whole year as a resource for 1,000,001 games. I'm not going to share any ideas for games because I'm sure you know more than me what you could use it for. But that's one idea. Next slide, Chris. So the next thing I think that will work well in classrooms, and I've seen this done in several contexts, in an online lessons and also in face-to-face real classrooms. So have a green space. So that can be a wall, it depends on your context. Obviously, if you're in the same classroom every day, it can be a wall. If it's something that, you know, if you're moving around, maybe it needs to be something that can be carried, like a big roll-up poster or whatever. If it's online, it could be something like a Padlet. And this space, if you organize it at the beginning of a new term or whatever, or whenever really, it can grow and grow and grow until it becomes a huge resource in itself. And what things can you put in this green space? Okay, so the first things, I've just made a list here off the top of my head. You can ask the students, by the way, I've said student generated. So get students to bring in some data, some articles, an interesting link, and just add them to the green space. You don't actually have to do anything with these things immediately, but you can go back and use them. So for example, with data, thinking of language, and it's always important, I think, to keep at the back of your mind, I am a language teacher. Data is great because you'll be able to use these graphs, etc., to practice talking about percentages, rising, falling, etc., numbers in this context. Recommendations, if somebody sees a film that has a green tone to it, they can recommend the film. Other people can then watch the film, write reviews. It could be a podcast, it could be anything. Photo galleries are great. So you could say to your students, during the course of this month, I want everybody to add 3 photos to this gallery. And you can decide the rules if you like. So they could just be positive photos of our beautiful planet, how stunning our environment is, or things in nature, something positive, yeah. And then they can comment, they can give them captions, titles, etc. Quotations, that's always a good one. Quotations are great because you can have a list of quotations and then the students can talk about their favorite ones. Do they agree? Do they disagree, etc. A wonder wall, that's something I've seen used in quite a few classrooms of young learners, where students write something that they want to find out. So I wonder how many plastic bottles we throw away in this school, for example. And when you've got a list of all these I wonders, then what you can do is you can talk to students and you can say, okay, for homework next week, I want you to choose one of these and find out the answer and set them off to do some research. KWL chart is very similar, of course. I've put a picture there in case anybody is not familiar with this. So here you could have a big KWL chart and the topic would be the climate change or the environment or whatever. And students would write in the first column things they know, things they want to know. And then again, you can send them off to do some research and they can come back and complete the last line. So they could do this about things they've said they wanted to know themselves, or they could find out something for somebody else, whatever. And the last thing there I put is wicked problems. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. I wasn't, but the more I've been reading about sustainability in education, I've been coming up again and again with this idea of wicked problems. And a wicked problem, I'm going to read a simple definition here. It's a social or cultural problem that's difficult or impossible to solve because of its complex and interconnected nature. So that's a brief summary of it. But basically, business owners and leaders, if you like, in communities have said that the work that our students of today are going to be doing in the future is going to be heavily dominated by wicked problems. So it's a good idea to start getting them to think about these kind of problems now and about the language they might need to use when they are trying to find solutions to these problems. You can go online and find lists of examples of wicked problems. One might be something like, on a local level, how can we make our school greener, or how can we make our community use less plastic? Okay, that's very basic and quite broad. And then you give them the language they need to start talking about these problems. For example, speculating, or what if we, so language is language for suggesting, etc. I'm rushing a little bit, but I'm aware that I want to go through the rest of the slides. So Chris, the next slide, please. So another idea is green journals. And again, journals are not new. Lots of us have used journals and they're great in classrooms for getting students to think, self-reflection, putting their thoughts into words, etc. That's when they realize that they might need to ask for some language to be able to express something in their journal. That's when they'll start seeing connections, etc. So in the same way as you might have a normal journal, you could give your students a green journal. You could do this individually, or you could have them complete journals in pairs. You could have a class journal. The journals could be private, so nobody's ever going to read them. It doesn't really matter. You make up the rules, obviously, if you're the teacher. But the idea is that these journals will contain, above all else, language that will help them clarify their ideas, express their ideas, give their opinions, etc., and reflect, and hopefully go further and maybe take action, which ultimately it be more of a transformative experience for them. Next slide, please, Chris. Okay, green speaking. We always say we want our students to speak in the classroom. How can we get them speaking? And there are lots of things that we can do. One of the one thing I really like is this idea of how to. So these days, anything that you want to do, and I'm sure that those of you listening, you can put this in the chat box if you like, the last thing that you looked up on YouTube or Google or somewhere, how to do something. For me, the last thing I think I put in was how to make elderflower cordial, which is a drink that we make from the elderflowers that grow on a certain tree. And these days, you've got millions of videos explaining step by step how to do something. So you can get your students to make these videos, or they could actually just explain in class, or we're using a presentation, but videos are good. How to repair something, how to repurpose something, how to upcycle something, how to do something green. The next thing is a show and tell. If you set up a calendar and have a 3-minute show and tell, for example, if you've got 30 students or 20 students, so that would be 5 a day in a 5-day week over 4 weeks, and give each student a 5-minute slot somewhere during the class to do a show and tell about something with a green tinge, if you like, so a green tint. So that could be something that they related to recycling. It could be a plant. It could be a map. It could be some data. Doesn't matter. The idea is they decide, they choose something that's meaningful to them. They come in and they say, okay, I'm going to show you this, and they explain why. You can give them some language, obviously, to use. Another thing is to create and present something with a green tint, and that could be anything. You could give them a choice. I'm a big believer in giving students choice. So you can tell them they can create a short comic or a meme, an infographic, a poster, some artwork. They might be a songwriter or a poet. Let them decide what they're going to create. And again, you're ticking lots of boxes here in terms of being a language teacher. You're developing their creativity, their presentation skills, and you're allowing them to personalize things and make them think about what's meaningful to them. The final point on this slide, you might or might not be familiar with the 6 hats or 6 thinking hats discussions. You can look this up if you like. It's a form of having a discussion in a group of 6. You can change it and have 3 or 4 or whatever. So you can have a statement about the climate emergency or whatever. You can say, for example, nobody should fly more than 5 times in their life, for example. And then you appoint a colored hat. So, for example, if you give somebody a white hat, it means they are neutral on this topic. If you give them a yellow hat, it means they are very positive. If you give them a black hat, they are very negative. And so what you're doing there, they're having a discussion, but they're not giving their personal ideas and opinions. They are taking on a role. So therefore, they are able to probably say things that they feel more comfortable saying, because it's not really them saying it, okay? You can look up those 6 thinking hats and see what colors refer to what kind of things, and try it out with, I've tried this out with children of 6 and 7, okay, even though it was actually designed for business context. Okay, next slide, Chris. Okay, this is the last slide, and this suddenly occurred to me when I was actually making the slide to finish with, that we can be 2 things. We can be green language teachers, so we model green behavior, sustainable behavior. Our students look up to us. They do notice things. They will notice if you go into the classroom with your own mug or cup from home and fill it from a tap with water instead of going in with a bottle, they'll notice. And some of them will ask you about it, or you can tell them about it, and they might copy you. So be a green language teacher. But also at the same time, remember that you are a language teacher, but try to be, I would say, a green language teacher, so that the language that you are teaching is relevant and is going to equip your students with the exact language that they need to be able to understand what's going on and to be able to take part. And also, when that language starts to appear in the exams, as it is doing as we speak, they won't be confused by what it means, and they'll have something to say and hopefully will do well. So I think I've got to the end of my slides, and we've got some time for Q&A. Sorry if I rushed through that a little bit. I was keen to I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. So if anything wasn't clear, please, now's the time to ask about that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Kath.
you, Catherine. I really like your ideas. I think my favorite one would be the vocabulary box, the green box. But those were such lovely areas. Thank you.
It's a simple idea. I think teachers already do some fabulous routines, and sometimes we can just tweak those routines. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as we say. We don't need to change everything. We just need
You're right.
to make
It doesn't have to be
things.
very complicated.
We've got one question in the Q&A box from Nada. I can read it out. What should I do when there are low achievers who find it difficult to participate in the groups assigned for a certain role in a discussion? I assume Nada means people whose level of English is low. I assume that's the meaning. Right, says Nada, she does, she's confirmed that. Okay. I mean, I think one of the problems with, or one of the challenges about, I don't know what Kath thinks, I'll let Kath speak in a minute, so I'm butted in. One of the problems is that the climate debate can appear to be very complicated, very complex. As I say, some people think, I don't know the science, I can't talk about that. It's not necessarily complex at all. And I think one way of, if you're forming groups to discuss, maybe to discuss about public transport in the town or something like that, or why aren't our buses hydrogen powered, these kinds of things. If you've got people whose language level is a little bit lower than the others, there's a lot of ways you can deal with that. It can be through the way you configure the groups. So you can perhaps have people of similar levels together to avoid anyone dominating and making other students feel they're not succeeding. But I think one of the things that worries people is something that Kath mentioned, which is vocabulary. They think we don't know the vocabulary. And that your box is brilliant for that, Kath, isn't it? Just a collection of terminology. I think that's the thing that worries people. But increasingly, I would say if you have some students who are struggling a little bit, just if you speak Arabic, a few words of Arabic in their ear can often help, just to to reassure them. But I think the problem is often vocabulary. I don't know what you think, Kath.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I think this is a problem. This is an issue, a challenge, shall we say, not a problem, it's a challenge that all teachers have, and not just related to this topic. I would say just give those students who have less ability more support. So give them a piece of paper. I would actually give them a piece of paper with a list of vocabulary they can use, or some example sentences that they can use. Give them 5 minutes to prepare something and practice it. Some kinds of speaking activities too, so you put maybe 3 people together to talk, and then you can regroup people with different partners and talk about the same thing. That's a great way of doing things, because the first time they might not be as confident, but the second time they've already done it once, So they'll have already practiced and they'll feel more confident. So give them as much support as possible.
I agree, Kath. We've got another question from quite a few questions coming up in the Q&A box. Khalil says, what about IELTS? Well, I mean, I don't know very much about IELTS, the way the exams are structured. I don't know whether you, Kath, but I know topics, green topics are already appearing in IELTS. So I think, you know, the work that you do around green issues in class will help people be more prepared for IELTS topics.
Yeah, and one thing that I remember from IELTS is that you have a graph or a chart, and sometimes you have to transform the information, transfer it from a graphic form into a text or whatever. So that good practice would be just to find a chart or a data about something to do with this and get them to practice using that content, if you like, so that they're familiar with it.
I agree. And Mohammed's got another question here, which I think is about resistance. His last sentence is, those who oppose the idea might be the administration or some of the students. There is opposition sometimes, but I mean, it's interesting. I was at a meeting in London about 6 weeks ago, and there was a very senior British diplomat there. I can't say who she was, but she said the country in the world that has the largest investment in sustainability per head of population is Saudi Arabia. So if anyone in school starts resisting, and also I know the Emirates are very active as well, so well, actually, these are government policies. These are things that our students need to get involved with. You know, the next COP conference is in Egypt, the one after that is in the Emirates. So whether it's opposition from parents, opposition from administration, in the nicest possible way, I think you say this is actually very important for our students, and it's going to be integrated into national curriculums and so on. But you do get resistance sometimes, definitely.
Chris, could I add something from?
Of course, Rachel. Yeah.
Thank you. From a publisher's perspective, because I think that the large publishers, as far as I can understand, are really noticing these issues now. They are taking them on board. They are engaging with them. And what that ultimately will lead to is there is going to be more and more information of this kind that's going to be included in books. So actually that's going to help the transition and increase the awareness and hopefully help to decrease the resistance as well. It's a gradual process, but I'm sure that it's going to happen. I'm sure.
And I've just seen a comment from Alan Davis in the chat, I think it was, saying that the green topics are quite common in IELTS. So, you know, but by just exploring various green directions in class, we are helping students to become more confident, whether it's talking about or writing about these topics, or as Kath says, for kind of information transfer activities. So I think it's everybody wins.
Yeah, I think actually as well, just to, as what Rachel said there, I predict that over the next few years we will see these topics being added into the curriculum, but maybe across all disciplines. So not just in language or English, but they will become embedded in sort of cross-curricular. And yeah, it's just time, isn't it? We just have to be a bit patient.
Yeah, and I think picking up on that, those of you who work in it, well, whether you work in the school sector or the university sector, I mean, these are multidisciplinary topics, aren't they? There's something in geography, there's something of physics, there's something of chemistry, there's obviously English, there's virtually every topic, even history, looking at historical events through climate change as it's expressed in history. So it's anyone who's working in a school context where you're teaching school academic subjects in English, you can work with a geography teacher or work with a physics teacher and make some really valuable learning experiences for the students. I'm going to have to jump a few questions because we're running out of time. We've got Shadi says at the end there, in classroom activities, would encouraging the use of student smartphones be an alternative to paper? Yes, I think it is. I mean, again, teachers are worried sometimes about smartphones because students get, you know, a bit distracted sometimes. They can be a little bit distracted, but I think it's a valid way of doing it. They can also obviously use laptops, or you can project text onto the wall. There are lots of different ways of doing it. I think somebody wanted to answer that live. Did they? Oh, it's been answered live. They've been answered live. Okay, they've been done. Kath, do you want to say anything about devices? And
no, but there's a question here from Lena Omar. How can we evaluate such activities? 6 hats. Okay. And I would say that when you evaluate any kind of speaking activity, you decide the criteria. So it would depend very much on the context. So you can maybe write, and the important thing when it comes to evaluation is for the students to understand how you're going to evaluate it. So you might decide that you're going to monitor them and give them guidance, and you want them to use 6 words that they've learned about, this topic, or you might give them, you want them to make a certain number of interventions. You decide whether you're going to focus on fluency rather than accuracy. And I would just choose 1 or 2 rubrics, write them on the board and say, I'm going to be looking at this, and not make it too complicated.
Nice question here from Mohammed. What about the use of realia to help in I think he means green rather than great language teaching, or great language teaching? Well, one way of doing that is most of you probably work in campuses that are very clean and tidy, but we all know that university students are not always very good at putting their food waste in the correct bin, and sometimes you see rubbish thrown on the floor. If is actually physically showing waste, saying, look, look at all these bits of cardboard, all these bits of food packaging that were thrown away today. If that's a fairly dramatic use of realia. And if you live near a beach, beaches are not always very clean places either. So saying to the students, why don't you go down to the beach tonight, take some photographs and bring it into us, see what you find. And the mess that people leave on the beach, and the plastic that gets washed up from ships as well.
You could also, just jumping in there to add to Chris, that you could also maybe have a photo, get them to take 2 photos maybe for homework, good practice, bad practice, of exactly that, so a litter thrown on the floor or whatever, and something that's lovely and well kept. To that contrast, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Good and bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
One other, we've got time for one more. Ali asked at the end there, what if students get distracted if they don't have a hard copy of a reading text? Well, I mean, I don't think we're saying they should not have a hard copy of reading text. What I'm saying is just the single-use ones. I mean, if they have a hard copy of whether it's in a book or in some kind of handout, that's fine, as long as it's used lots of times, basically. No problem with, having hard copies that are used by several students, or where the paper is recycled and used for notes on the back. I agree, people do need a hard copy because they will potentially get distracted. But then we did have the question earlier about using smartphones or tablets to deal with that. And of course, the great thing about many of the ebooks these days is you can just click through to get a definition or get clarification, which can make the whole reading process much more interactive. But I do think people do need a hard copy. I'm just saying it should be a hard copy if it's paper used by multiple students, or a hard copy on a tablet or a laptop. Sherry, are we running out of time, aren't we?
Yes, we have about a minute, but
Okay.
I don't see any further questions as well.
I think we've got everything, yeah.
Yes. Any other burning questions? Thanks, Chris. That's what I responded to you, Chris. Fantastic. I think that rounds us up to the end of the session then. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
If you have any questions at all, I'm just going to pop an email address in the chat box. You can let us know here. And thank you for being such a fantastic audience. Thank you for all your participation. Thank you, Chris and Catherine and Rachel, for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and see you next time.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.